We are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and with us now is the blogger formerly known as Digby and still known as Digby, Heather Digby Parton, who blogs for Digby's Hullabaloo site and is a regular writer for Salon. She's been blogging almost 2 years longer than I have. I was just looking at her bio. That's a long time. And she's won all kinds of awards, Koufax Award and Paul Wellstone Award on behalf of the Campaign for America's Future. That's before I joined that group, but I certainly would have supported and endorsed that prize. She also won the 2014 Hillman Prize for opinion and analysis journalism. She's done all sorts of cool things in movies and God knows what else. But I'm happy to say she's a friend, and I'm happy to have her on the program. Shall I call you Heather or Digby?
Either one, whatever you're comfortable with. How about you? Should I call you Richard or RJ?
We both have the same problem. First of all, I'll call you Heather. You can call me Richard or RJ. We both started with, I had a milder cover name than you did, but we both started with a kind of blogging name and a real name, and then we decided it was time to move past that. But these names, they follow you around. They never go away.
They do. It becomes your part of your identity, and it's kind of fun to have another name, but it can be confusing for people.
Yeah, particularly because I was never called RJ. My middle initial is H, but as you know, I like the Dylan song. You can call me RJ. You can call me Ray. It doesn't. So anyway, thanks for joining us. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the grave issues before us with the Digby, Heather Parton. And one of the things that struck, I knew whatever day we got together to talk, we'd have a lot to talk about. And life has not let me down. Your latest piece, or the last one I saw anyway, was on Nick Hanauer and the Pitchfork piece that he wrote, which was kind of an awesome piece, and I really liked your response to it. Tell us a little bit about Nick Hanauer, if you don't mind.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with him prior to this piece, I have to admit, but he wrote this. It's in the Politico magazine, I think, which is about, basically what he's doing is making a self-interested pitch to his fellow 001 percenters and saying, look, if you don't care about particularly the middle class, but I think he also talks about the poor, but I think the middle class is the real self-interested piece of this for these, vastly wealthy billionaires, that, number one, it's not good for business because these, the less money people have to spend on goods, the old Henry Ford trope in which he said that he wanted to pay his workers enough so that they could buy his product. That he resurrects that whole idea. And then he also just talks about the fact that, look, if you push this stuff too far, history has shown over and over and over again that there will be a reaction among the people, and it rarely ends well for those at the very top. I mean, sure, the top resurrects itself eventually. Capitalism inevitably leads that way without some form of mediation and regulation. But at the time, whoever happens to be sitting there at the moment doesn't do very well. So he's kind of, and that's where the Pitchforks idea comes in, which is that he says, watch out. The Pitchforks will be coming after you. And I've thought from the beginning of the financial crisis, one of the things that absolutely astonished me was the inability of these people at the top to kind of see that, to understand that it was not even in their own best interest to, somehow or another come out and try and mitigate the damage. And instead they did the opposite. And in fact, whined and moaned and cried about how misunderstood they were. And you remember, even President Obama said one little thing, he called them fat cats once. And they absolutely lost their minds. So, I've wondered about this from the very beginning, and this is the first piece I've seen where you have someone of that class actually making the case, which seemed to me the obvious thing for these guys to do after what had happened in 2008, and the near collapse in the terrible economy that subsequently everyone's been enduring except for them, and the fact that this was going to become glaringly obvious to anybody, and that they needed to mitigate it. So my assumption is that these guys just aren't as smart as they think they are, because that's a very dumb thing to do.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. Having known, we're talking with Heather Digby Parton, having worked with some of these guys in a previous incarnation, I can tell you that a lot of them are like idiot savants. They're brilliant at the production of money and not that sharp. And it's hard for them to understand that, but not necessarily that sharp on social issues. But let's look at it a different way. Let's take the counter-argument for a second. A counter-argument could be made, okay, 5 years since the glaring fraud and inequity and injustice, which has only mounted as the government has failed to act, blew up the economy, put tens of millions of people out of work, caused tens of millions or underemployed, caused tens of millions of others to suffer. Arguably, the significant majority of the Americans have been, in fact, losing wealth for decades. And yet, why wouldn't they think that they're safe and immune from people with pitchforks? Because if the pitchforks haven't come yet, they might think, well, they ain't never coming. So what would you say to somebody who says, yeah, you guys have been telling me to worry about pitchforks, but everybody's idolizing me for my billions and envying my private jet, and nobody's come for me yet, so why should I worry at all?
Well, I mean, they may be right. I mean, maybe that it isn't going to result in that. I mean, it's possible, but history shows that it doesn't tend to go well for them. They have so much money that it seems to me that the wise thing to do for any of them would be, they don't need every last penny. They honestly don't. And this idea that they do, and that they can somehow survive by taking every last penny, just seems like an idiotic assumption. Why do they need everything? They have billions, and they're making billions more. It seems to me that the smart move is to do what Hanauer is doing, which is saying, look, guys, we've got a lot. I mean, he's a billionaire, and he admits that his billions were mostly made by, he made a small killing with an entrepreneurial concern of his own, and then his friend Jeff Bezos said, hey, invest in my little operation here, it might go well, and of course it did, and he made most of his money from Amazon stock. So, he kind of admits that it wasn't really any great brilliance of his that brought him to this place, but he's a billionaire. And I don't think people really get just how much money that is. I mean, I think it's so abstract to people that they don't really understand it. But these guys who have it certainly know that they will never want for anything, that they have so much money they literally don't have enough places to spend it. So It just seems to me that this idea of let's just keep going because it's going so great is an idiotic, it's a risk, I mean, because historically things do come to some kind of a breaking point, and things can happen very quickly. I was just reading today about, in The Guardian, they were doing a century retrospective on the beginning of World War I, and it was like 37 days from some obscure action in an obscure assassination to a full global conflagration, and things do happen. Why take the chance? That's what I say. I mean, maybe they'll get away with it this time.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I was playing devil's advocate to a certain extent, but you're right. From Archduke Ferdinand to global conflagration, from when I remember when they first started sitting in Occupy Wall Street, and I remember that I was in Washington at a conference for the moment that everybody was saying, oh, they don't even have a policy agenda, and I kept saying, don't speak too soon. This could be something. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks later, the national conversation changed, and that was a minor eruption compared to what we might see. So I do tend to agree with you, but I guess I would say as a counter to that, I would quote, I guess it was Chief Black Elk, who said the love of money is a disease with them, mm-hmm. that they actually don't want, most of them, not the Nick Hanauers, but the guys I've known, they don't want stuff. They're addicted to making money. and as much as they can get. It's nuts. But we do. It was interesting. I mean, I don't know who the guy is either. I don't want to praise him or knock him, except to say that I think we do, given the amount of disproportionate power that the Sheldon Adelsons and the other billionaires have in this world, we need some more billionaires to say, hey, it's in our enlightened self-interest to chill a little bit right now, even if we don't, Nick Hanauer says we need customers. Ford said the same thing. Right now, 40% of corporate profits, almost 50%, are going to financial institutions that frankly don't need customers. They just need other billionaires and other corporations. But that pitchfork factor should be a lot more troubling to them than it is. And you mentioned Tyler Cowen in your piece, which I thought was interesting, because Tyler Cowen is an economist who I've written about at length, who is, in my opinion, kind of the court laureate of this whole billionaire economy. Basically says 15% of the people will be very wealthy, 85% will live in, and he uses the word shanty towns. So Tyler Cowen, the economist, doesn't necessarily celebrate it, but he just says, hey, that's just the natural state.
Yep.
And so Tyler Cowen says there ain't no stopping it. Nick Hanauer is afraid of pitchforks. Is there, in the minute we have left, which is a dirty trick, is there a third alternative to either shantytowns or pitchforks?
Well, I mean, it could be if I suppose it could. We could have stage enough of a recovery within a reasonable period of time to get back to a sort of stasis in the middle class. I mean, I guess it could happen, but it really seems unlikely. The global.
Well, let's explore that. Let's explore that when we come back, since I pulled a dirty trick on you and asked you to solve the universe's problems in 60 seconds. Let's explore that when we get back. We're talking with Heather Digby Parton, blogger extraordinaire, good friend of the Zero Hour, and our good friend. We will be right back after these messages. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour with the blogger formerly and currently known as Digby, Heather Digby Parton. And we're back, and as we were going to the break, I was saying, is there an alternative to either a permanent underclass living in shanty towns, the Tyler Cowen vision of the future, or the Pitchfork vision of the future? And Heather, you were saying, maybe some sort of liberal, moderate reform that gets us back to semi-stability with the middle class. But I guess that would be, of course, good. But I haven't let go of the idea that the fundamental transformation we should have seen after 2008, 2009 is still achievable. That we can really redirect the movement towards inequality and really build the kind of democratic and economically just society that we all envision. Am I just living in a fantasy world?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, what else can we do? I mean, I don't know that there's any other approach that we can take other than, try and be optimistic about that and perhaps persuade enough people to, use the levers of power such as they are, whether it's media and persuasion or the political system or maybe even having billionaire on billionaire cage matches, whatever it takes, to try and shift this. I mean, the trajectory is not good. I mean, I will just say that it doesn't look good. But of course it's not hopeless. I mean, things can change, and of course, there are other options too that are even worse, I think. That one thing that tends to focus the mind in other direction would be war. You could have, some natural disasters that are, probably going to happen at least over the course of the next 50 years that are going to focus the mind in different directions. I mean, there's a lot that can happen other than the either-or pitchforks or just, we're all just living in shanty towns. But the only thing that we can do, I think, as citizens and members of the human race, is to try to guide our societies as much as we can to, to mitigate, at least mitigate the worst of it, care about poverty, be more, try and do something about this inequality. And you know what? It's not that complicated. I mean, there are ways to to mitigate the inequality that are out there. I mean, there are actually, it would be difficult in a political system that's completely dominated by billionaires and which has been set free to spend as much money as they want to continue that domination. But it's not impossible. That could change. I mean, there are policies available to, start to at least, stop the momentum that's going, so quickly in this sort of shantytown direction. I mean, we could do it, and I just have to think that it's still possible. I mean, obviously it is. There aren't pitchforks. I mean, there's a lot of unrest. It's a very unstable sort of situation when you look at the protests that are happening all over the globe over different things. But the fact is, people are taking to the streets, whether it's in Thailand, whether it's in the Middle East. It happened here even, I mean, with Occupy. And
I think it could happen again. I mean, I guess there are two things that get me through. One is, like the Bhagavad Gita says, we're entitled to our actions, not the results of our actions. So we, like you say, we should just keep arguing for what makes sense, keep articulating it, and keep it positive, because I think that people respond to a positive message rather than just things are effed all the time, as many of us have the tendency to do. And the second is, I call it a Pascal's wager with the future. Pascal's wager was Pascal said he doubts there's a God, but just in case he's going to believe, to cover his bets. Maybe we won't succeed, but let's behave as if we will, so that if things line up right, we're on the right path. Last thing I wanted to mention, just because from the cosmic to the very specific, there's one thing recently where I think you and I might have disagreed. And I'm curious about that. It's just been on my mind. And that was, you wrote a very nice piece about Peter Beinart, one of the Iraq War hawks. And he said, he reconsidered, and you were very, very kind with him about it, that this is the kind of war hawk who deserves to be listened to because he's reevaluated, he's reflected, he's thoughtful, and so on. And then you took it back. You said, oh, good Lord, when I look like a fool, I really look like a fool, because he criticized, he lit into Obama for Obama's handling of Iraq. And here's what struck me about that. I didn't think you looked like a fool, and I didn't think that Beinart seemed unreasonable in his criticisms of Obama. Is there something I'm missing? Because you and I almost always agree. I
agree that there are criticisms to be made of Obama. I was unpersuaded by the criticisms that he made. And I felt that they were more of the same sort of, I don't even know if there's a school for this. Maybe there's a word for it, or if there isn't, we should get together and coin one, which, in domestic politics they call it the Green Lantern theory of presidential power, where the president has supernatural superhero powers to create, to change things. And I feel that a lot of these liberal war hawks have the same belief that the United States has agency in ways that it actually doesn't. I mean, I see us more at this point as being this great giant that's actually tied down by its military might, and basically no longer has agency to make the kind of decisions that Beinart was saying Obama should have made, which were, things like, he should have pushed harder against the Maliki government, and he should have sent messages. And these are all things that just don't actually have any real effect as far as I can see. I mean, sure, diplomacy is great, and obviously that's the kind of power that I think the United States should try to project. I don't think in this case, in Iraq, it would have made a difference. I don't think that I mean, to me, this seems like it was preordained, this particular falling apart. I mean, it was held together by chewing gum, and, it would have taken the United States having 30,000 or more troops in the country forever, which is what guys like McCain and the rest of them are saying we should do. It's just like South Korea.
Right.
We should still be there. So that was my beef with him. It wasn't so much, I have no problem criticizing President Obama's foreign policy. In many ways, I think the red line in Syria was a drastic mistake and ended up, destabilizing whatever sort of, hope they had for trying to influence events. But I just felt like I was impressed by the fact that he had given a very, what seemed to me to be a sincere mea culpa for his support for the Iraq War, and then came along and made another, what I see as a liberal hawk argument for what went wrong in Iraq. I mean,
it's interesting. It's a little nuanced, and we may not come to a conclusion on this. I think you're probably right. He couldn't have changed al-Maliki. He might have been able to distance himself from Maliki more than he did. But in the end, and on the Green Lantern theory, I will say that, yes, I think sometimes people overestimate the ability of the president, but I've seen a lot of Democrats, after an Ezra Klein piece, I wrote a piece about what I started to consider, president in bondage literature, that, this whole sort of, that the president can't do anything, so don't blame him for anything. It was like 50 Shades of Grey moved to Washington. And I think that the president, so I think this is all nuance. I think you and I are kindred spirits, and I think that once in a while the nuance, it's a slightly lighter or a darker shade of gray, but I think we're right there with you. So,
well, let me just say that I agree with you on the Green Lantern theory, generally speaking. I call it that they are saying now that the presidency is basically a ceremonial office. It has no power, can't do anything. That's absurd. It's one branch of government. They have vast amounts of power to do it. So I don't agree with that. In fact, it's the opposite. I mean, I think the president has much more power to do things domestically than they're willing to admit, and much less power to do things internationally. Because, as I said, it's I have this sort of Gulliver, this Gulliver's giant picture in my mind of how the U.S. being this vast military empire is now kind of walked itself into a corner and has less room to maneuver than it used to. So I kind of
Richard Nixon said I will not accept that the United States is a pitiful, helpless giant, but that seems to fit your description. Unfortunately, at least for now, we're going to have to leave it there, but Heather Digby Parton, great to have you on the show. I hope you'll come back sometime and keep doing what you do.
Anytime, Richard, and thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. And we will be right back after this with another star of your progressive media, Cenk Uygur. We are looking forward to capping a great hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.